Chapter 22. His Days at the Alabazar Muth. The shifting of the monastery from Baranagar to Alambazar took place sometime in November 1891, when Swami Abhedananda was moving on from place to place in his long and strenuous pilgrimage and peregrination from Calcutta to Rameswaram. He therefore knew nothing of this event. So let us give here some description of the premises of the new monastery, where the monk now intended to proceed after his return from the southern Tirthas. None of his brother monks, however, knew about his homecoming. The description that follows here in regard to the Alabazar Muth is based chiefly on the memory of Swami Vivekananda and is incorporated in the book, The History of the Ramakrishna Movement and Mission. He wrote, "The house stood midway between Baranagar and Dakshineswar on the road running from Calcutta to Dakshineswar. It was a commodious two-story building on the road leading westward to Lokan Ghosh Ghat on the Ganges, and had a long veranda with round pillars. The main entrance, however, was on the lane on the eastern side. The house was divided into two apartments. On the ground floor of the outer apartment there were two dark rooms, one of which had the ill fame of being haunted. As such, they were seldom used. The first floor had a long hall which was used as a parlor in the daytime and a bedroom at night for 8 to 10 people. Proceeding from the hall to the south along the eastern veranda, one would come to the southern veranda, to the south of which were the shrine room and 3 bedrooms, separated by a wide passage. The inner apartment, too, had a courtyard with a covered veranda on 3 sides, the eastern side alone having a large open terrace. To the south of the shrine there was a small room to store things for worship. On the ground floor there were 4 rooms and a kitchen. 2 of these served as stores and was used for keeping Ganges water in big jars. The 4th room was occasionally occupied by either Gopal Ma, an elderly lady, or Gauri Ma, both disciples of Ramakrishna. There was also a pond. A portion of the lower veranda served as the place for dining. Being haunted, the house was rented for the paltry sum of 10 rupees per month. Anyway, the new monastery building at Alambazar seemed somewhat better than the previous one at Baranagar, and it was at this place that Swami Abhedananda returned to join his brother monks after the lapse of a long period of recluse sojourn. The disciples had to remove from Baranagar to Alambazar mainly for 2 reasons. As already indicated, the Baranagar Muth solely depended on the munificence of 2 householder devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, that is, Suresh Chandra Mitra and Balaram Bose, both of whom had died in quick succession by the middle of 1890. And now their death meant acute financial difficulties to the brotherhood, and it had been pointedly expressed in a letter which Swami Vivekananda wrote to Pramada Sharan Das at Varanasi in May of 1890, from which we quote the following lines. "Now there is no knowing as to where his disciples will go with his sacred remains and his seat. The disciples are sannyasins and are ready to forthwith to depart anywhere their life may lie." Apparently, the concern of Vivekananda at the time was not so much for the accommodation of his brother monks as it was for the suitable shelter where the sacred relics of the master could be safely preserved. Though Abhedananda knew about the death of Balaram Bose, he knew nothing about the death of Suresh Chandra Mitra until his return to the new monastery at Alambazar. Incidentally, it might be mentioned here that Swami Vivekananda came to Alabazar Muth only after his triumphant return from the West, which was in the beginning of 1897. Alabazar was not an unknown place to him, and as such, Abhedananda had little difficulty in finding out the exact location of the new monastery. As was written, as I entered into it through the main gate, I met first Shasi and Sharat. When Shasi embraced me joyously and Sharat caught hold of my hand and escorted me to the southern veranda on the first floor. By and by, others came one by one and asked about my welfare. Shashi, however, seemed to be all the more eager about Naren and asked me if I knew his whereabouts. I told him about my meeting with Naren, first at Junagadh and then at Bombay. Our leader, under the assumed name of Satchit Ananda, is now traveling incognito all over the country. And as they came to learn from me about Naren, all the brother monks became somewhat assured and delighted. For so long, none of them had any knowledge about his flight. Then Abhedananda was shown around the new premises of the Muths by Swami Sharadananda, along with Swami Ramakrishna Ananda. Abhedananda has devoted considerable space in his Bengali autobiography in describing the place in minute details. As he was going around the entire premises up and down, he came to learn that Shashi occupied one of the 3 rooms on the western veranda on the first floor, which overlooked the lane below. A room adjoining to that of Shashi was then allotted to Abhedananda, which he accepted gladly. It is on record that he was all the more glad to find that at last some arrangement had been made for a permanent accommodation of all the brother monks by the grace of the Master. And inwardly he was still more satisfied that the ashes of the Master would now be properly enshrined at the new monastery. As he set his foot on the premises of the Alabazar Muth, Abhedananda must have heaved a sigh of relief, not because so much for himself or for his brother monks, as particularly for the perpetuation of the memory of Sri Ramakrishna, who came on earth to save the Indians from the spell of the worldly glamour of Western culture. What greater regret can there be than this, that no memorial in this land of Bengal, in the neighborhood of the place of his sadhana, at least until the 1960s, has yet been raised in the honor of him by whose birth not only Bengal, but the whole of India has been sanctified with the hallow of spiritual regeneration, unprecedented in the history. We might as well conjecture that such thoughts must have swelled in his mind as it did in the mind of Vivekananda. Abhedananda was shown by Shashi the shrine room of the Master in the new monastery. Here he was also provided with a writing table and a table lamp, and he was very much delighted to have them for his exclusive use in his room. As he later wrote, I also found that the conditions in the new Muth were comparatively better than those at the Branagar Muth, and the arrangement of our daily ration was also satisfactory. Food, which was mostly provided by the householder devotees of the Master, were plenty. Not only that, there was a show of improvement in other matters too. The devotees, as I noticed, had already provided the Muth with a new floor mat, and the previous tattered one was gone. Among other new articles that I found were a small wooden cot and a lamp for the purpose of reading. On the whole, each of us then had a piece of cloth and a dhoti to wrap our bodies. It seemed as if the goddess of wealth, Mother Lakshmi, had opened her stores for our cause. Tulsi, that is Swami Nirmalananda, was already there, and I found him as a helping hand just as Sashi had been in the matter of daily service to the Master. From this description of Swami Abhedananda, it might be inferred that the overall picture of the Alabazar monastery was to a great extent encouraging than what was previously at that dilapidated and poverty-stricken monastery at Baranagar. So he found the brotherhood at Alabazar somewhat secured and well placed, and the very atmosphere, which was no longer rigorous or stringent, seemed to him quite favorable for his own way of monastic life, particularly for study, meditation, and sadhana, Although at that stage of his life, now fully blossomed, he needed very little of either of them. Now let us have a glimpse of his life at the Alabazar Muth. According to his own narration, we find that very soon after his arrival here, the room allotted to him became a veritable sanctuary of study, meditation, and austerity. Abhedananda then used to spend most of his time inside the room, and he seldom came out. Introspective by nature, he liked to remain wholly immersed in his own spiritual pursuits. The room occupied by him soon became known to all, both the inmates of the ashram and outsiders, as Kali Vedanti's room. In the whole history of the Brotherhood, this can be regarded as a distinction which Abhedananda only enjoyed. Indeed, among the chosen disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, his figure stands out, marked by some characteristics which were his own and which fitted him in a remarkable degree. As he later wrote, "It was then my sole intention to spend the rest of my monastic life devoted to the study and discourse of Advaita Vedanta, thus to build up my career on the basis of its ideals. I then daily used to read, among other scriptures, particularly the Gita, along with the commentary of Shankaracharya. As I read each sloka, I tried to grasp the underlying meaning and implication of it, and so long as I could not grasp it, I meditated upon the particular sloka, and thus, when the meaning became clear to me, I then passed on to the next couplet. I hardly came out of my room, and it was only at meal time that I did so. Otherwise, my days and nights would be spent either in study and discourse or in meditation. I could hardly perceive then how my time went by, so deeply immersed I was in my spiritual pursuit. Occasionally, all the members of the Brotherhood who were then residing there would assemble together for debate and discourse on matters religious and philosophical. But every one of us had our aim on how to develop in these lines, following the teachings and directives of our phenomenal master, who in fact was all in all of our existence. But it was Shashi who excelled us all in the wholehearted service of the master. Why did Abhedananda read the Gita exclusively, and why was he attracted to the commentary of Shankaracharya, leaving aside all other commentaries on this sacred book? A study of his life would be incomplete without taking into account the significance of it, which has a particular bearing in the gradual evolution of his spiritual nature. As is indicated elsewhere in this book, the main chord of his life was renunciation, and its vibrations must have suffused his existence and consciousness as a whole. Did he not learn from his master at the Kasapur garden house, while attending on him, that although the world abounds with scriptures, sacred and profane, none is so helpful to a spiritual aspirant as the Gita, which is an ancient scripture like the Vedas and Upanishads? The exact metaphysical connotation of the Gita meant very little to Abhedananda, and as he absorbed in each and every sloka of this scripture, it became to him clear that in the Gita there is very little that is merely local or temporal, and its spirit is really large, profound, and universal. The Gita can thus be presumed that when Abhedananda was sitting in his room, secluded at the Alabazar Muth, after his long pilgrimage, and devoted himself to the study of the Gita, his approach and study of this most sacred of all sacred Hindu scriptures was not a scholastic or academically scrutiny of its thought, nor did he attempt to place its philosophy in the history of metaphysical speculation, nor even dealt with it in the manner of analytical dialectism. On the contrary, his approach to the Gita must have been for help and light, and his aim must have been to distinguish its essential and living message, that in it, on which humanity has to seize for its perfection in its highest spiritual welfare. We shall discuss more on this point later on when we come to the philosophical thoughts of Swami Abhedananda. But now we proceed to our narration. And Mahendranath Datta, in his memoirs of his brother Swami Vivekananda, has given a nice picture of the life of Swami Abhedananda when he was staying at the Alabazar Muth. Datta wrote, on his return to the monastery at Alabazar from the pilgrimage, Kali Vedanti devoted most of his time in study and meditation, as was characteristic with him. He practically shut himself up in his room, where he remained deeply immersed in study and spiritual practice. He was deeply versed in both Indian and Western philosophies, and his knowledge of English and Sanskrit was astonishing. Of all subjects, he was particularly interested in philosophy, and his mood, his trend of thought always reflected it very distinctly, and this marked him out from the rest of the inmates in the monastery. If I remember correctly, it was during his stay at Alabazar Muth that Kali Vedanti composed in Sanskrit a hymn to Sri Ramakrishna, and perhaps this is the first hymn composed by anybody about the Master. It was a fine composition, and still many recite it. It was customary with some at the monastery to take tea in the morning, and those who gathered round the hot cups used to participate in the discourse of various scriptures. Some would raise a point which the others attempted in thrashing out, citing various scriptures, and ultimately all the brother monks were benefited by it. Many substantial discussions were then held, and sometimes it was happened that when a particular point was raised, the discussion went on for several days, until and unless it was fully solved. And this led the monks in the study of several religious and philosophical books. Though everyone at the time of debating stuck to his own point, yet there was so much fellow feeling and sense of reverence among themselves that the whole place would assume with an air of an ideal educational institution. None of them betrayed the slightest feeling of animosity or hatred against the others. They were all inspired debaters to whom nothing meant so much as spiritual talk. One would hear them simultaneously various scriptures from various lips, as if it were a sort of college lecture room. None, however, could excel Kali Vedanti in debating, in which he seemed to be the master. His expositions were as lucid as they were convincing, and which clearly reflected his scholasticity. I would also never forget the bold thrust of his arguments, combined with vivid phraseology and elegant diction. Mahendranath Datta was also referred to in the book an incident that is nonetheless interesting, which we reproduce here just to point out clearly the interest of this monk, which Abhedananda, that is, not only lay in matters purely philosophical or religious, but also in science, history, and antiquity. He wrote, one day, after the discourse was over, the brother monks went together to the bathing place adjacent to the Lochan Ghosh Ghat. The spot was then known as Kalwalas Ghat, and there was a big banyan tree on its bank. There, under the tree, we sat together, myself and Kali Vedanti, and we began to talk about the library of Dr. Rashendralal Mitra. There was a large collection of scientific books in the library of this celebrated antiquarian, and a pioneer of scientific research in Bengal, which was then about to be sold by auction. On hearing this, Kali Vedanti told me, had I money enough, I would have then purchased Dr. Mitra's collections, which are immensely valuable. Is it not strange that this strong philosophical reasoning realized the worth of Dr. Mitra's collection of scientific books, and he was all the more eager to purchase them? This is quite natural on the part of one who afterwards, as a world teacher, sought the synthesis of religion and science in all his utterances and lectures, which extended over a quarter of a century in Europe and America. While his days at the Alabazar Muth were thus being happily spent in study, meditation, and discourse, Abhedananda fell ill by infection of foot sores, which made him bedridden for several months. This was the inevitable effect of his long traveling barefooted in the regions of Ajmer, Pushkar, Rajputan, and it has already been told that Abhedananda was particularly cautioned about the possibility of this infection by Swami Vivekananda himself when they met each other in one of those places years earlier. From the accounts given by Swami Abhedananda himself, as well as Mahendranath Datta, we gather that a few months after his arrival at the Alabazar Muth, sores began to erupt below the foot, and his whole body began to swell terribly, and he was completely bedridden. The brother monks got alarmed at this. Soon the boils began to melt one by one, and out of them there appeared long, fine threads of white color, and as one attempted to remove them by pulling out, they were found to be torn at the roots. Gradually, the infection spread all over the body. The first physician to attend the ailing monk was Dr. Bhajanath Mukherjee of Bharanakar, but however, he could not diagnose it correctly. Then some eminent physicians from Calcutta were sent for, who examined the sores carefully, found them as due to a worm infection, a rare type of skin disease mostly found among people belonging to the region of Rajputana. As Swami Abhedananda wrote later, 7 times I had to be operated on, and I remained completely bedridden for 4 months. I cannot adequately record how Sharat, that is, Swami Sharadananda, nursed me day and night in those days of my strange illness. As he constantly attended on me, Sharat had to sacrifice his sleep, and he would remain at my bedside without having any meals. Niranjan was then away from the Muth for some days, and as soon as he returned and found me ailing, he too devoted himself in nursing me. It is impossible to forget the selfless service of my brother monks during those fateful days of my monastic life. Mahendranath, in his memoirs, has given a very touching description of the method of nursing carried by Swami Sharadananda, which is worth reproducing here. He wrote, "As the patient lay on the bed, with his legs held stretched in a raised position on 2 pieces of planks and tied with strings, the legs had to be kept covered with a soft cover made of feathers. And with what devotion did Sharat Maharaj nurse his ailing brother disciple! He used to wash daily the sores, and as he did so, he would allow nobody to come near the patient, lest the infection might catch him. Sharat Maharaj was not afraid of himself, and he gladly took the risk as he engaged himself in nursing day and night his beloved brother monk. He served Kalivedanti in this manner for 3 months, and this he regarded then as his everything, his true study, meditation, and sadhana. It is impossible for anyone to speak adequately about this unique nursing done by Sharat Maharaj, which reflected a mother's affection and concern for her ailing child. It was he who then displayed the spirit of service, which afterwards became one of the outstanding characteristics of the Ramakrishna mission." We need not comment any more on this, for it is above any intellectual comment. All it shows is the truth that the new communion of apostles was not founded in vain. India was yet to realize that which was founded at Anpur was in the long run destined to bring about a spiritual regeneration, which India needed most. The illness really proved debilitating, and despite of prolonged treatment and motherly nursing of Swami Sharadananda, it had incapacitated him to such an extent that Swami Abhedananda lost all his strength to walk by himself. Mentally strong as he was, he, however, did not give in. Rather, he was found to resign himself wholly to the will of the Master, once stating, "If I am to remain a miserably decrepit for the rest of my life, it will mean very little to me. The Master's will be done." He is reported to have made this remark one day to a brother monk who was attending him. We gather from Mahendranath's account that due to constant stretching out of the legs in a raised posture, the blood circulation was disturbed, resulting in the thinning of the patient's leg muscles to such an extent that legs looked like a pair of sticks. The physicians then advised that the patient must be made to walk by any means, otherwise he might become a cripple for life. And it was done accordingly, and daily he would be taken out, resting on the shoulders of two brother monks, and was forced to walk in that manner for some times in the garden path of the monastery. But as Mahendranath wrote later, one day it so happened that Sharat Maharaj helped Kali Vedanti with a piece of stick and asked him to walk down the steps. And presently they came in the courtyard where Kali began to talk to Sharat very tenderly. All of a sudden, Sharat Maharaj left the place and ran upstairs, leaving Kali Vedanti alone with the stick held in his hands. Thinking himself absolutely helpless and quite unable to walk, he began to entreat and cry out. Sharat Maharaj showed an indifferent attitude to all his requests and threw a few harsh words at him, apparently with the intention of provoking Abhedananda, who was left alone. As nobody paid any heed to him, he became quite angry, and then he stood up on his legs, and soon he was found to come upstairs all by himself, while Sharat Maharaj, Tulsi Maharaj, and Shashi Maharaj began to laugh heartily. It was then that Sharat Maharaj, drawing near to Kali, told him affectionately, "Brother Kali, don't be angry with me. I have done it for your sake. The physicians advised us." And it was from that time that Kali Vedanti began to walk by himself with a stick in his hand. Before we close this chapter, we might as well refer to another interesting incident of the Alambazar Muth, which was the direct bearing on Abhedananda. One day, writes Mahendranath, it was about 9 or 10 in the morning, and Kali Vedanti was found standing quietly in the front of the door adjoining to the kitchen, while others were busy in managing the vegetables. The conversation gradually drifted to the memory of Balaram Bose, and everyone was full of praise in regard to him. It was probably Balaram Maharaj who raised the topic, and said that they should remain grateful to Balaram Babu, who, while he was alive, helped them generously. The other monks, too, were of the same opinion. Kali Vedanti stood silently, and who was listening to them did not join in their conversation. Suddenly he became very vexed and burst forth in a stern attitude. "Yes, we ought to show our respect for Balaram Babu, for he was a devotee of the Master. I can understand that. But I refuse to bow down my head to anybody just for the sake of a few grains of rice. But your case is different. You are flatterers to those who provide you with food, and hence you are all in praise for Balaram Babu. I am a sannyasin. I cannot bow down my head just for the sake of a morsel of food, which is easily available by begging." We also need not comment anything on it, for it speaks for itself, and it reveals to us the metal of which the character of this true monk was built. It was not the strength of character alone, rather it was the logical consequence of a mind bent on renunciation. Indeed, any assessment of Abhedananda's monastic life would be inadequate unless we take into account this aspect of his spiritual nature, which was shaped and formed by one who himself was the high priest of renunciation, Sri Ramakrishna. Abhedananda was born with it, and it was the very breath of his life. Almost all the brother monks returned to Alambazar Muth one by one from their respective pilgrimage, and the group then consisted of Swami Brahmananda, Swami Nirmalananda, Swami Turiyananda, Swami Ramakrishna Ananda, Swami Sharadananda, Swami Premananda, and Swami Abhedananda, and a few others, when the monks were passing their days happily at the monastery. There came the news of Swami Vivekananda's signal success at the Parliament of Religions at Chicago, which filled their hearts with delight. A wave of joy flowed over the Alambazar monastery, and how Swami Abhedananda rose to the occasion in demonstrating the triumphal success of Swami Vivekananda across the Atlantic is another memorable episode in the life of this monk during his stay at the Alabazar Muth. Unfortunately, neither the main biographers of Swami Vivekananda nor the author of the history of the Ramakrishna Movement mission has mentioned anything about the role played by Swami Abhedananda following the news of Vivekananda's success at Chicago. Since the life story of this great monk cannot be complete without any reference to this episode, we are going to relate it in the next chapter.